Okay, let's pick back up with the 1920s. As a result of the Second Industrial Revolution, American imperialism, the second great wave of immigration, the Gilded and Progressive eras, and World War I, America emerged in the 1920s as an economic and political powerhouse. American society had been transformed by mass production, mass consumption, and mass marketing, and the nation was poised to assume the global lead in technology and industry. In short, the United States emerged from the final decades of the 19th century and in the early 20th century as an increasingly urban, heavily industrialized world power. There were many inventions that became affordable for the middle class. The car is perhaps the biggest, and with other industries such as the car and other industries, many products became affordable for the middle class, such as the sewing machine, the bicycle, airplanes, cars, electricity, the light bulb, phonographs or record players, the flush toilet, movies, streetcars, radios, skyscrapers, cameras, and other goods such as Coca-Cola, canned goods, toothpaste, and washing machines. This era changed the way people lived, traveled, communicated, ate, drank, how they interacted, and even what they wore. This is an advertisement for Henry Ford and also a Dodge advertisement showing that not only is there a new credit industry, but that the price of cars has been driven down so that the average American family can own one. On the ad on the left it says, "How did he ever get the money to buy a car? Perhaps he doesn't make as much as you do, but he took advantage of this quick, easy way to own an automobile," and it's advertising Ford's weekly purchase plan. Radio, as I mentioned just a second ago, was also became the new mass medium. Politicians used it, advertisers used it, industrialists and corporations used it, and it became a new form of entertainment. In 1920, you had the first commercial radio station. By 1930, there were over 800 stations and 10 million radios in American homes. The emergence of the major networks that we know today, NBC and CBS, both emerged in the 1920s and began on the radio. Movies were the other great new form of entertainment. People didn't have televisions in their home, televisions didn't exist, but they went and watched television essentially in movie, quote-unquote, palaces. Talkies emerged around 1927, and a new type of American emerged, and that is the American celebrity. By 1930, there were 80 million movie tickets sold per week, and that's out of a population of 100 million. Movie stars such as Rudolph Valentino, pictured on the right in one of the most famous old films, The Son of the Sheik, Mary Pickford, Charlie Chaplin. All of these are new movie stars in this new era of movies. There were other celebrities that emerged during this period beyond that of movie stars. Perhaps the most famous was Babe Ruth in the sports world. He helped usher in baseball and make it America's favorite pastime. On the right, you see Charles Lindbergh, who on his Spirit of St. Louis was the first to make a transatlantic flight. Songs were written about him. He was a national hero, presented with all kinds of awards and presentations, even by the president. People named their children after Charles Lindbergh. So new celebrities are coming about because of new technology. The greatest changing role of any one group in American society was that of women. They had gained the right to vote with women's suffrage, with the 19th Amendment, and their dress was also changing, in part, and this is not on the slide, but because of the invention of elastic, the popularity of the bicycle, which helped get them out of the big hoop skirts, and they begin cutting their hair shorter. Fashion, now that you have mass-produced clothing, becomes something that they all want to imitate from one another, and the latest, everyone wants to be wearing the latest style. Women are not only voting, but they're also working. The chart in the middle shows the percentage of women in the labor force. And I know that this is rather small. Let me blow this up. This is a chart that shows, oh, excuse me, it's a little blurry, but this is the line of women working in the 1920s. Some of the blowback from society, they saw these women and this sexual revolution, as they called it, as moving too quickly and making their daughters and their mothers something that they shouldn't be. The ones who participated, the women who participated in this new style and trend, were sometimes known as flappers or vamps. Vamp coming from the word tramp, and so those were the ones that were seen a little too fast and loose. But the flapper was this modern woman who pushed all kinds of boundaries in the workplace, as far as in the home, their role as a mother, and in some cases challenged conventional notions of Victorian morality. No doubt you know quite a bit about the 19th Amendment and the impact, or the road to women's suffrage. The League of Women Voters, the National Women's Party, Alice Paul, Margaret Sanger, Carrie Chatt. But all of these are going to have a major impact in the 1920s as women began to participate much more in a much more visible role in the public sphere. There are also a lot of changes in literature and art, and in some ways the 1920s is seen as a renaissance of American art and literature. You have such artists and writers such as F. Scott Fitzgerald, Sinclair Lewis, Ernest Hemingway, H.L. Mencken, Eugene O'Neill, E.E. Cummings, and we'll mention a few more in a second when we get to the Harlem Renaissance. There's also a phrase used to name some of these young men in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, and that is the lost generation. Gertrude Stein, writing about the effects of World War I on America, wrote that, quote, "Every man becomes civilized between the ages of 18 and 25. If he does not go through a civilizing experience at that time of his life, he will not become a civilized man. The men who went to war at 18 missed the civilizing. All you young people who served in the war are a lost generation. You have no respect for anything. You drink yourselves to death." I would argue that probably the poster boy for this generation would be Ernest Hemingway, who fought, then came back, had great works, of course, but was overall depressed and miserable and drank himself to death. The Harlem Renaissance in many ways occurred because of the Great Migration. The Great Migration was a movement beginning in 1910 where many African Americans living in the South began to move to cities. They were hoping to escape tenant farming and sharecropping. About 1.5 million moved to the cities by the end of the 1920s. And as such, many cities have a Harlem Renaissance or an explosion due to some of this population increase. Chicago might be the biggest city that gains from this Great Migration. The Harlem Renaissance includes artists like Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Georgia O'Keeffe. Langston Hughes, obviously a famous poet, Georgia O'Keeffe, a famous artist, and Zora Neale Hurston, a famous author. This movement for Black Pride found its roots in urban life, in cities, and it was the first self-conscious literary and artistic movement in African American history. Some of the early leaders of the Harlem Renaissance were men such as Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, Marcus Garvey, And they also used education and the arts in order to accelerate and to accentuate their artistic abilities. One of the modes of expression during the Harlem Renaissance in the arts was jazz. This was so important that, in fact, one of the nicknames of the 1920s is the Jazz Age. The two most famous African Americans during the Jazz Age were Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington. Remember that the African American performance is coming out of a previous period of vaudeville acts, where where African Americans still could not perform and white actors performed in blackface. Now African Americans are becoming the sole entertainers and have much more autonomy in their performances. At the beginning of the screencast, I mentioned that some of what the 1920s was about was not just about all of this new innovation and changing ideas about women and African Americans, but also the resistance to that. One of the main forms of resistance to the Roaring Twenties came in the form of cultural fundamentalism. Cultural fundamentalism deals with religion. You had those who deemed themselves modernist, those who deemed themselves fundamentalist or traditionalist. All of this came to a head in the Scopes trial. The Scopes trial was, as you know, centered in Tennessee, and Clarence Darrow represented John Scopes, who was the teacher on trial, and Williams Jennings Bryan represented the prosecution. This was really the culminating event in this idea of cultural fundamentalism. This was modernity versus tradition, and it was all over whether one had the right to teach evolution as a theory. Scopes actually lost the trial on a technicality, but then later this was overturned. William Jennings Bryan was already in not great health and was older, and he actually died just within a few days after the final verdict of the trial. This trial, although it didn't go exactly as planned at the time, Scopes was not found innocent in the original trial, but this serves to show the end of this religious challenge, and it becomes much more acceptable to rely on technology and science to understand the world around you. Religion also plays a large role in getting the 18th Amendment passed. What began as the temperance movement before the Civil War became prohibition during the progressive movement, and the 18th Amendment banned the sale and production and consumption of alcohol. As you might imagine, things that are in high demand, according to the laws of economics, do not go away if they are made illegal. They just simply go underground. This is where you have speakeasies, you have beer dives or beer cellars, you have certain areas known as wets and dries, dry being no alcohol, and you have the emergence of organized crime that is helping to fill the void of alcohol, which is in still high demand. It was called the Noble Experiment because it did occur with the best of intentions. Nevertheless, the consumption and production of alcohol actually increased during this period and was later repealed by the 21st Amendment by FDR. And then finally, we have another new term called xenophobia. This is dealing more with the racial side of resistance. I have also mentioned some other terms such as eugenics. That is a way that people try to use science in order to prove racial superiority and inferiority. Xenophobia is where you're have a fear of someone different from yourself or from change. And this will all culminate in a couple of new developments that I will talk about in just a second.